I saw myself again. Dying.
This must be a memory from your original. Apparently a flaw in the transference process. The internal system was meant to filter such personal recollections.
Wait, what are you saying? My original...
A clone. Yes.
Yeah, this is one of those games where you end up dying a lot. Everspace is a 2017 space shooter with roguelike elements, developed and published by Rockfish Games. This was the first game that they made, but it proves that they know their stuff, especially when it comes to visual design. Let's take a look. So before anything else, you have a few options of how to play the game. You can use a controller or mouse and keyboard for your inputs, and you can play it with Track IR or in VR if you have a Vive or Oculus headset. While a controller works fine, you'll probably find yourself limited by the number of bindings for all the different controls. Playing the game with mouse and keyboard not only feels smoother and works better overall, but it's encouraged by the developers as their intended way of playing. After all, this is much more of a space shooter than a spaceflight simulator. So let's see who's doing the shooting and what's going on.
Something's not right with me. I'm having memory loops. There was a dispute. I was standing in the way of their plans. I was restrained. Shot with something. Who is this? I managed to escape. That's all I can remember. I must find some answers.
The protagonist wakes up with no memory of who he is or the situation he's in. He has vague memories of certain people and events, but other than that, he's as clueless as you are when you first start the game. After your little throwback flashback, you're put into the pilot seat of a ship, buddied up with an AI companion, and you start your journey of following the navigation coordinates already put into your ship. Where are you going exactly? Only your AI buddy knows that, and he isn't going to tell you, so you'll just have to find out when you get there. It's established very early on that you're a clone of somebody, which serves as the explanation for how you're going to be doing a lot of respawning. Everything else is a bigger mystery that you need to uncover as you proceed on your adventure. First things first, this game looks amazing. I lost count of the amount of times I had to stop just so I could look at the environments and take them all in. This is easily one of the best parts of the game, no question. Because of the roguelike elements, you'll be going through the same sectors over and over, but because each level in each sector is randomly generated, you'll never see the exact same level twice, barring one or two exceptions. This helps considerably with preventing each run from becoming too tedious. Even though the levels are randomly generated, virtually every area you warp into is gorgeous to look at. Each sector has a particular color theme to it, which makes you want to keep progressing just so you can see more of them, especially when you're trying to do your first completed run. There are certain things that won't show up until later sectors, such as black holes and certain types of space weather, as the first two sectors tend to be relatively similar. As you progress, the variety in environments will open up more, which can lead to some pretty crazy looking levels. There's a good diversity of planets that show up, from Earth-like worlds to big gas giants. They can also have large ring systems present, which will make for great backdrops when a level takes place right above one. There will always be rocky and or icy asteroids scattered around, with some levels being absolutely littered with them. If you're a big fan of space battles and asteroid fields, then this is probably the game for you. It won't just be chunks of rock and ice that make up the environments, as there's plenty of wrecked ships and abandoned stations around as well. The game takes place entirely within a demilitarized zone, so this will be a common sight. There are installations that are still active, however, with some taking up a large part of levels that make for interesting battlegrounds of enemies. If you want to remember all the nice places you visited on your journey, there is a photo mode present as well. If you love pretty pictures of space, you'll probably find yourself making use of this extensively. As if it were a cherry on top of the already impressive visuals, the lighting can be just as stunning throughout the game. Virtually every level has a distant star which acts as a big light source, casting shadows on everything appropriately, but also giving off visible light rays and a huge lens flare. The other stellar objects will produce some cool visuals as well. Black holes will bend light around them, close by stars will brightly illuminate everything facing them, and solar storms will look as amazing as they are dangerous. This can also be said about the game's combat. as it involves a lot of brightly coloured lasers and other projectiles flying everywhere. While it looks nice, I think that the explosions are the best part of this. They look awesome, and the bigger the ship, the better the explosion will be. The combat is often frantic, particularly when fighting against multiple enemies. The various sounds of gunfire, shield impacts and such can make things hectic, but it doesn't go too overboard with it. Even though the combat can be fast, you'll always be aware of what's going on thanks to your ship's alerts and notification sounds. There's a different sound for just about everything, both inside and outside of combat, which you'll learn to pick up on quickly. From a simple little noise when your shields go down, to the black hole proximity alert that only makes them seem even more terrifying. Each weapon also sounds uniquely different, from classic pew-pew lasers to 40mm Gatling guns. Some of these can sound a bit underwhelming though, with the scattergun being the worst offender. Out of all the weapon sounds, my personal favourite has to be the beam laser, as it sounds pretty damn satisfying. Apart from sound effects, another thing you'll be hearing often is the player character and the onboard ship AI bickering with each other. The AI, named Hive, will chime in with comments and engage in some occasional banter with the protagonist. It's kind of like two mismatched buddies on a space adventure, but it has some charm to it.
This is taking forever, but we're closer. I can feel it. Am I right?
The answer is in the affirmative, although I can unfortunately offer no further details at this moment.
A great load of help you've been.
I try my best, although it is impossible to please everybody.
There's only a small handful of other voice characters in the game, which I'll talk about when I get to the story, but everyone sounds fine for the most part. In terms of music, there's a decent amount of variety with the game's original soundtrack, as it's not just limited to one genre for the whole game. The battle themes range from instrumental rock to electronic music.
Keep it up!
But outside of combat, there's all kinds of cool background tracks that are fitting for all the nice environments that you'll visit. Because this is a space shooter and roguelike game mixed into one, you'll need to keep in mind that this game expects you to die. In fact, the very first time you do, the game will officially welcome you. Every level is randomly generated, as you'd expect from a roguelike, and dying will put you right back at the start with all your gear lost. These kinds of stakes will help motivate you to fight hard and keep pushing for more progress. For the majority of the game, you'll either be fighting enemies or collecting resources, the latter of which you'll need for further progress as you craft your own equipment. There are some little quests you can be given from time to time, but they tend to be far and few between, so there isn't much else outside of the two main modes of gameplay. The combat can be either quick little engagements or long and drawn out fights, but they often get pretty chaotic. One-on-one fights will be straightforward affairs, but when you go up against a dozen or so enemies at once, it can become an absolute fustercluck to say the least. You can even the odds by constructing and deploying friendly drones, or baiting the ships of other factions into battle, but you'll be wanting to pick and fight your battles your way, Otherwise, you're likely going to find yourself looking at the post-game results screen once again. Overall, the combat is fairly enjoyable, smooth, and never really gets too tedious. There's a variety of both natural and unnatural resources that you can mine and collect throughout Everspace. You'll often be mining asteroids and lighting up enemy ships to get most of them. Some of them can just be found randomly floating out in space, or by getting too close for comfort with black holes. If you happen to be afraid of those, you're probably going to have to face that fear, because it's the most reliable way of getting both dark energy and dark matter, which are often needed for high-end gear. Good luck. Out of all the resources, nanobots are one of, if not the most important in the game. They're the only way of repairing your ship's hull and components, so if you see any nanobots floating around as loot, you're going to want to make a beeline for them. As nanobots are number 1, fuel closely follows in terms of importance. You'll need this for warping from level to level, but if you try warping without fuel in the tank, you'll take a big chunk of damage and your ship's components can also get roughed up, which can be a real hassle to deal with. If your ship is already low on health when you do this, you'll explode and your run will be over just like that. You have a 25% chance not to suffer any damage from warping without fuel, which can be increased through perks, but it's always a risk that you may or may not want to take. Most of the game's enemies are dealt with like you'd expect from a typical space combat game. Take down their shields, and then go for their hull before they do the same to you. But Everspace will often go beyond that simple formula, and it'll throw you curveballs in many different ways to mix things up. Some enemies and weapons will ignore shields entirely, some fighters will teleport behind you in personnel kit, and other enemies will just leave you wondering what the hell they even are. When entering combat with enemy fighters, they'll rarely be alone, because many of them will have drone buddies that will make life more difficult for you. The basic ones will just shoot at you, but the more specialized drones will do things like blocking your sensors and shooting down your missiles. The most annoying one by far is the Weber drone, which will stop you in place and make you a sitting duck for enemies. Alongside the various enemy fighters and drones, you'll also have to contend with corvettes, frigates, and elite variants of enemies. These tougher enemies will carry better loot, and usually drop access cards, which are the only way of getting special loot inside of the wreck stations. Fortunately, not everyone out there is hell-bent on killing you, because there are different NPC factions present, with each of them often getting into brawls with the others. You have the Outlaws and the Okar, who are both always hostile, and you have a neutral corporate faction called GNB for short. Like I mentioned before, a good tactic is to lead a bunch of enemies from one group into another if there's too many of them to deal with. But with the neutral GNB, you'll often need to take cover behind one of their ships or infrastructure to get them aggroed from enemy fire that was meant for you. GNB offers something else other than being the big kid who fights your battles for you. They'll often have stations or transport ships around carrying fuel, credits, and other goods. If you're hurting for resources, you can attack GNB to take them for yourself, but they might report it and make their buddies in the next level hostile to you immediately. They're no pushovers either, as they make for some pretty tough enemies. It's another risk versus reward decision that's up to you to make. It won't be the end of the world when you do eventually die. You'll be back in the first sector of the game, but you won't have lost everything. What you get to keep are the credits you've collected, as well as any blueprints, subroutines, glyphs, or ship colors you've stumbled across. There's a few ways to earn credits, such as completing little quests, challenges, or finding it as loot, but most of them are earned by beating up other ships for their lunch money. The vast majority of credits will be spent on perks. This is basically where you level up your character and ship, which is split into 2 sections respectively. Your pilot perks will transfer over to the other ships, but anything you've spent on your ship will stay with that ship. So if you decide to try out a new one after putting tens of thousands of credits into another ship, be wary that it will start off pretty limited in comparison. The perks themselves play a major part of the game. They'll do things like earn you more credits, give you higher critical hit percentages, increase your equipment slots, and boost your ship's health, just to name a few. If you can gather a decent amount of credits in each run, buying these perks are what will determine whether you get further than last time, or get mobbed by outlaws in the same level again. It does feel pretty satisfying when you save up a lot of credits, start a new run with getting more perks, and then get back into the game feeling more powerful than before. Your other key advantage throughout the game are the blueprints that you can pick up. In the early stages of the game, the only weapons and equipment that you can use are what you start off with, or whatever you can scrounge up from the enemies or the environment. But with some blueprints on hand, you can use the game's various resources to craft anything that you want. If you found a particular weapon that you're good with, Then if you get the blueprint for it, you can use it in every single run, once you've gathered the resources each time, of course. The subroutines and glyphs are essentially the same thing, as they both act as ship enhancements, but you have to obtain each from different locations in the game. They act as modifiers for your ship, with most of them offering both a plus side and a downside, with only a few being purely positive. I guess you can think of them kind of like the artifacts in Stalker. With the ships themselves, you only start off with one, with another two available once you've saved up some cash. You have a small, nimble fighter and a big bulky gunship. Your starter ship is the middle ground, as it's a jack of all trades. Your choice of ship will impact things like your movement speed, size, and your shield and hull strength. One of the most important differences is that certain devices can only be used with certain ships. The majority of them are interchangeable, but more specialized things like turrets and invisibility components are only usable with a gunship and scout ship respectively. Regardless of which ship you use, all of them are fairly nimble and can fly fast while weaving between asteroids and dodging gunfire. You have the option to give them some light customization by applying different color schemes, which are reflected on both the exterior and interior of the ships. I like this detail because you can still see it whether you like the third person or cockpit camera modes. When it comes to outfitting your ship, there's tons of different devices, consumables, and weapons to choose from. Better yet, most of them are equally as useful as each other, just in different ways. This means you can safely experiment with different weapon and equipment setups without having to worry about min-maxing your build too much. The variety of weapons alone are impressive. They're divided into primaries and secondaries, with the primaries being things like lasers, Gatling guns, cannons, and so on. The secondaries are for your missiles and torpedoes. All the weapons have different stats that will make them better in certain aspects than others, so it's up to you to decide what works best. As part of the game's random generation, you can find special enhanced versions of primary weapons occasionally, which will have random boosts to their stats. Your ship's devices are divided between passive and active abilities. There's a lot to choose from, but you'll only have so many slots for them. Having shields is pretty much a no-brainer, but beyond that, you'll have to make some tough choices, because even if you unlock the maximum amount of equipment slots, you're still not going to have anywhere near enough for all the best parts. This also applies to your weapons, as well as the last type of equipment, which are the consumables. These are equally as varied as the other bits of equipment. You have the option to use energy injectors, damage boosters, or various drones among many other options. With so many different possible loadouts, Everspace allows for many different playstyles, which greatly benefits the overall gameplay. If things are getting too tedious for you, you can just assemble an entirely different loadout during your run and mix things up in any way you like. On top of that, all primary weapons and devices can be modded to have various boosts to their stats. No matter what setup you decide to go with, you'll always need to be wary of your ship's energy reserves, which are used for everything on your ship, except for the fundamental things like basic movement and warping. If you're too careless with energy usage, you can find yourself in situations where you're surrounded by angry aliens while you're barely sputtering out lasers and unable to get away from the danger. So you'll need to keep this in mind when equipping yourself and engaging in combat. This will become more important the further into the game you get. As you progress, you'll see that the levels are divided up into sectors, of which there are 7 in total. The first 6 sectors have a varying amount of levels depending on how far you are into your run. The last sector always has one location and is set in the same place for story purposes, so I'll get to that in a bit. When you put them all together, it doesn't actually take that long to do a complete run through all of the sectors. This means that it won't feel like a huge setback if you die halfway through, because if you put a lot of focus on warping from level to level, you can get back to where you were relatively quickly. Assuming you've put some money into your sector scanner perk, you'll see that each area in a sector has a designated hazard level, which roughly determines how many enemies there are, as well as how dangerous they are. But you won't necessarily want to avoid these areas, as the more hazardous a level is, the better the resources and loot there will be. High risk is high reward. As you progress further into the game, the hazard levels will increase for more and more areas until just about every area in a sector is high risk. From time to time, you'll warp into an area only to find out that you can't warp out of it again because there's a jump suppressor being used somewhere. You'll have to track it down and turn it off, unless you want to end your run here. Sometimes the suppressor won't be mounted on part of the environment, because some capital ships can have their own one built in, which means you need to destroy the whole thing if you want to get out of there. There are some beneficial things that appear throughout the levels, thankfully. One of these are the comm arrays that reveal every resource and location of interest once you've hacked into them. There are also some trader ships that sometimes hang around that will buy and sell a few different resources to you, as well as service stations that can offer not just trading services, but also refueling and repairing. As nice as the levels are, you can't stay in them forever, so what's stopping you? Oh, well that's not so bad, I can take them out.
Warships, depart immediately.
Well, fuck. More and more Okar fleets will warp in until this invincible warship arrives, so don't dilly-dally too much. That's not just some random ship that's chasing you either, it's actually relevant to the story. At the start of the game, you wake up in a ship with your AI buddy Hive, and you need to follow coordinates to an unspecified location. As you progress from sector to sector, the protagonist will begin remembering how he ended up here. He had a dispute with somebody, was forcefully poisoned, and managed to escape. He flew off to a hidden location, and then put himself in cryosleep to stave off the poison. As you begin to make more progress on your journey, the protagonist starts to recall more details about who he is, or at least who his original is, since you are playing as a clone. His name is Adam Roslin. He was enlisted in the colonial fleet, but he was more brains than brawn. He buddied up with a guy named Seth before they were mobilized for war against the alien Okar. It's not long after learning this part of the backstory that things begin picking up steam. So that means that spoilers will start now. Jump to here if you want to avoid that. So not long after arriving in the third sector, your old buddy Seth rears his head. Of course, he doesn't know you're a clone of the real Adam, but he blames you for destroying something. Whatever it was, he wants payback. He runs away before you can destroy his ship, but the encounter only raises more questions. Further flashbacks reveal that Adam and Seth were sent to Cluster 34 during the war against the Okar, the sector of space the game is set in. The fighting was brutal, with Seth becoming an ace pilot, while Adam worked to clone more soldiers for the conflict. Before long, the war ended and a demilitarized zone was established. Some humans wanted to stay there for the opportunities, with Seth being one of them. In a change of career, he became an arms dealer and convinced Adam to help capitalize on the demand for illegal clones of humans. Their little venture was eventually uncovered by the human authorities, but instead of them getting to spend some quality time in shower rooms, an admiral of the fleet offers the pair amnesty if they help him with a secret project involving the Okar. Around the same time that Adam's clone remembers this, a mysterious woman shows up to give you supplies. Before you can find out who she is, she jumps away as quickly as she came. She'll be back later though. After you've made it to the middle of the game's 5th sector, you suddenly get pulled out of hyperspace and confronted by Seth once again. This time, he realizes that you're a clone and leaves you alone. For now. With more flashbacks, we learn that the fleet admiral, named Gork, had Adam decrypt the Okar genome, but after being told that it's part of a plan for restarting the war against the Okar, Adam refuses to cooperate further. This earned him an injection of deadly poison to force his compliance. Now working under guard, with the admiral holding the antidote, Adam had to either do his part or die. He destroys the work done so far and breaks out of captivity. He fled to a secret lab in the demilitarized zone and activated a remote cloning facility elsewhere. He sent coordinates to the facility he's in and put himself in cryosleep, waiting for a new body, since his current one can now be considered damaged goods. Back in the present, once you finally arrive in Sector 7, you'll reach the secret lab, but you're not alone. That mysterious woman from earlier shows up again, along with Seth. He's been following you so that he can get revenge on the original Adam. The unknown woman takes your side in this, and is revealed to be Adam's sister, Dinara. She tries to attack Seth and gets killed. RIP. You'll have to take out all of Seth's buddies to start coming for you in a wave survival section, but for some reason Seth doesn't join in. Well, whatever. After taking them all out, you get a cutscene of Clone Adam entering the facility to see Seth wounded by the defense system. He puts him out of his misery and comes face to face with the original Adam. They have an extensive catch-up, but realize that both original and Clone Adam are running out of time, because of the poison and because the clone sequencing is far from perfect. Original Adam dies, but not before showing Clone Adam what needs to be done to complete the clone sequencing. He needs to gather DNA fragments scattered around space, which becomes your new objective. Yep, you're only halfway through the game now. After committing uninstall.exe to get a new body, you begin your journey. Again. You still have all your unlocks, but all that's changed is the objective. Once you've tracked down your first DNA fragment, you'll see that it comes in the form of another clone. Of you.
Hey, identify yourself. You're not gonna like this. What the? No, this is a trick.
You have no choice but to kill these Adam clones to gather all the fragments. Happy hunting! Once you've gathered all the DNA fragments after multiple runs, you'll arrive back at Sector 7 and complete the clone sequencing. Now Clone Adam will have a normal lifespan. Also, hey, remember that big warship that appears if you wait too long in one area? Well, it suddenly warps into Sector 7 at this point. It turns out that our good friend Admiral Gork is commanding it. He's doing damage control for his failed plans, which means killing any and all Adam clones. After finally getting to do a real boss fight, Gork is defeated and his ship explodes, which also kills you. With that, the game is completed. Post-credits, you get revived as another clone. If you do one more run all the way to Sector 7, you see a big crater from the boss battle, and learn that all future clones will have normal lifespans, which means the galaxy is about to see many more Adam Roslins in the future. Your current clone body will leave the demilitarized zone and start living a normal life. So that's it for the story. If the combat throughout the game was too easy for you, even on hard mode, then good news, because there's a dedicated hardcore mode. The differences here are that you can only upgrade your ship perks, you have to choose a handicap in each sector, and nothing carries over between runs. If you die, you lose everything. Hardcore mode is a lot more punishing than the standard game. It's like regular hard mode, but with more limitations, which can be punishingly difficult. One slip up in a fight can have dire consequences for your run. The handicaps can be absolutely brutal, with the game sometimes forcing you to choose between two equally terrible choices. It's only fitting that hardcore mode has red tints on the HUD and menu elements, accompanied by angry rock music. This is the big manly game mode meant only for real gamers. Hardcore mode offers a significant challenge, so if that's what you're after, you should definitely give this a go. That covers everything in the base game, but there are some more adventures to be had in the expansion, titled Encounters. It integrates into the main game as soon as you install it. Even if you're in the middle of a run, you'll start seeing the new additions immediately. It expands on pretty much every major aspect of the game. There's new weapons, devices, consumables, enemies, one new resource type, and even a brand new ship to boot. One major addition is a new type of space station that can temporarily upgrade your ship in a variety of ways, as well as refine your resources, which can both be extremely helpful. But perhaps the most notable part of the expansion is the inclusion of several voiced NPC characters who each offer a quest chain for you to complete. Some of these are fetch quests like in the base game, but the others are more unique, such as bounty hunting and scanning alien life forms. Each one has a unique reward at the end, from a special wormhole drive,
Whoa! Check this out!
to a team of friendly ships that randomly show up to help you. The new ship, called the Sentinel, is built for a specific playstyle, which is electronic warfare. If you've done countless runs with the other ships, using this will feel like a breath of fresh air. It can easily hold its own just as well as the other ships, with the Sentinel even being able to have additional mod slots for your equipment. I wouldn't say it's essential to have the expansion, but if you enjoy what the base game has to offer, then the content here should be right up your alley. Everspace was sitting on my wishlist for years, until I went out on a limb to do a review of it, and frankly, I'm glad I did. There were a few bugs that I noticed in my playthroughs, mostly to do with object placement in the randomly generated environments, which can be inconvenient, but I never saw anything worse than that. All things considered, I'd easily recommend this game. It has an enjoyable gameplay cycle, with gorgeous space environments that make for a memorable experience. If you want to pick it up yourself, you can grab Everspace on Steam or GOG. So that's all for now. I'll be looking at a game that's not set in space next time, which should be a bit refreshing. I'll see you next time for that video. Until then, take it easy.